Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. Just want to give you a heads up that this podcast is split into 2 episodes. As we were editing, we realized the content matter is so rich, and we wanted to be mindful of people's attention spans. And so we decided to try to keep it around 30 minutes or so for each episode. Gives you some time to process the information in between. But I'm also going to implore and ask you to come back and listen to the second episode. Our friend Corey really shares so much of his heart in this episode and so much of his experience. And it's just a beautiful lesson in how we can be together. So, see you on the other side.
Hello and welcome to Permission to Be. I'm your host, Becka Epley, joined today by my good friend and co-host, Tommy Allgood. Permission to Be exists to be a space of hope for those journeying to find their true, authentic selves. We hope that the story shared here will inspire you on your own journey and help you unlock the permission to be who you have always truly been. Hello and welcome to Permission to Be. I'm your host, Becka Epley. Joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Tommy Allgood. Tommy and I have lots of fun. If you have not had the privilege of listening to one of our episodes yet, we bring the laughs and the wisdom all together. Today, we are joined by Corey Leek.
Welcome!
Yes, sir. Hello. How's everybody doing?
Corey is not only a fellow podcaster, but he is a speaker, a communicator, an artist. He has a passion for bringing justice, faith, and culture together. So, Corey, thank you so much for joining us, hanging out, having some good conversation.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much. I just love the concept of what you're doing with this podcast, and I feel super blessed and honored to be on. So thanks for having me.
It is our honor. So Corey, tell us a little bit about what started your journey. Have you always been moving this direction of being a speaker, communicator if you all have never crossed paths with Corey's work, he does an amazing job of dialoguing, of bringing people together on social media. And he does it in such a way that you can really tell that it's intentional and it's not just a gimmick or to get ratings or to get people to, the Facebook algorithms. There's a real intent. So Corey, I would love for you to share a little bit about what started your platform.
Yeah. The Facebook thing is really interesting because I didn't set out to engage people in dialogue on Facebook. It's just something that kind of started happening. Like I just started saying things that I thought were true about the world we live in, and people started engaging in those conversations. And I think it was probably a couple of years ago, I just asked the question, why do you or don't you go to church? And it was like, I thought maybe a couple people would chime in, and then hundreds of comments later, I'm like, wow, this is, really something that people want to talk about. So I started asking other questions around race and politics and religion, and people started engaging. And then I think it was, I know it was Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. It was that week that those two nonviolent Black men were killed by police. And I remember that I was really grieved over Alton Sterling. And I was kind of like, I was on Twitter that night and I didn't really see anybody talking about it. And so I started tweeting like...
For the audience, can you refresh them on some of the details regarding that case?
Yes. So Alton Sterling was, I think he had been, if my memory serves me correctly, he had been shoplifting or something, and he had sort of got away and had a run-in with the police in an alley. And he was running away from the police, and a policeman pulled out a gun and shot him in the back and killed him. And I remember just like being, really like torn up over that. And then 24 hours later, after the whole Alton Sterling situation, we had Philando Castile in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was riding in the car with his girlfriend, and I believe his daughter was in the back seat. And he was pulled over. And the thing that got me about this was I thought that 24 hours after Alton Sterling had become a national news story, that if I was a police officer and I saw a black man, he would have to be brandishing a weapon out the window of his car, or like he'd have to be doing something really, really aggressive for me to engage. Like I think I'd have been a little bit on edge. And the fact that a day later, an officer would shoot and kill a black man who's sitting in his car. He hadn't pulled a weapon on him. He simply told him he had a weapon, didn't reach for it. And the fact that he was shot and killed 24 hours later, it made me feel as though our lives were not valued. And I just woke up, and I was just like, the next day after this, I woke up and I'm just like in tears. And it was the first time I had been in tears over it. I was sad about Trayvon Martin and some of the other instances, but I was in tears over these two because I guess maybe I was a little older. I just felt it more. And from that day forward, I was like, I got to talk about this stuff. I mean, I know how to talk. I've never been an activist, but I got to talk about this stuff. And I love what Andre said to me. Andre Henry, who's a good friend of mine, said to me on my podcast. He said that after that, he decided to not allow the news cycle to dictate when he would talk about race. And for me also, it was around that time, and he gave me language to understand what I was doing. I was no longer going to let CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or anyone else dictate when it was okay to talk about issues of race and police brutality and things of that nature. So I was just kind of like, I think I want to fill my timeline with conversations about things that move the world forward, about justice. I'm not going to filter it. I'm not going to police it. I'm not going to, take sides when people are having an argument about something. And I'm not, and the other decision I made that I think it's been hard to stick with at times, was that I wasn't going to just block people because I didn't like what they said. Like I wasn't going to just like instantly be like, oh, I don't like what you said, so I'm going to block you, or I disagree with you, or even that you're racist, because I have a lot of racist people make comments on my posts, and I don't block them. I don't delete it. And the reason I don't block or delete them is because I don't know how many Game of Thrones fans there are out there listening to your show, or what you guys are.
I'm sure there's several.
There's this scene in Game of Thrones. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling this for anybody. So, if this is a spoiler for you, spoiler alert. Okay, the next 2 minutes, spoiler alert.
You have no excuse. You should have watched it already.
Exactly. I mean, if you haven't watched it by now, you don't want to. But like there's a scene where Jon Snow and that whole group of people that he's with, and I think Daenerys, are going to see Cersei, and they want to convince Cersei that the White Walkers are a real danger. So they bring one to her. They take it out of the box and they say, here. And because they said, I can tell you all day that we have a threat, that we are being threatened by these White Walker zombies coming to kill all of us. Or I can show you. And so sometimes when I'm post something on social media and someone makes a racist comment, I go, I can tell you, or I can show you that people actually think this way. That like people actually believe that the reason why there are less wealthy Black people, why Black people are less likely to own homes, or there's the percentage of Black people in prison versus the percentage of Black people in American population is so disproportionate that they actually believe, by what they're saying, I can infer that they actually believe that Black people are inherently more violent, more irresponsible, less hardworking, all of the things that that must naturally lead to this disproportionate distribution of justice. And I can tell you that white people think that way, or I can show you that white people think that way. And so I don't delete their comments and I don't block them, because I want them to continue to come and share your thoughts with us so that everyone can see the kind of stuff that exists in the world and how people think and how people talk to strangers who they barely know.
I think you had mentioned, I was looking through your website, and you said that you wanted to not erase bias and ignorance. And I definitely see that you're holding space for that. But I think one of the things that we've talked about in the past in some of the conversation that is sort of surfacing up with thinking about permission to be, I think with white supremacy, being in a condition of white supremacy, I think we talk about appearances all the time, and trying to pretend that we're farther advanced than we are versus being in relationship with one another and letting those biases and ignorances be what they are. Because I think when we let them be, then it shows who we are becoming as we navigate and work through them. I just saw Brian Stevenson speak here at one of the local colleges, and he talked about in the importance of social justice change. And if you don't know Brian Stevenson, he is the author of Just Mercy. It just came out also on the big screen. Highly recommend it. Deeply revealing look into the U.S. American criminal justice system. But he talks about, for social change, the need to create proximity with people. Like change does not happen unless we get proximate, unless we get adjacent with people who are different from us. And so that it's apparent that your gift in holding space for that to create change, to create meaningful change, man, thank you for that work. It's so important.
Yeah, man. And I do try to hold space for people. And I think asking questions is so much better than making statements when you're really trying to understand someone, because, I can't say that I disagree with you if I can't repeat back to you what you said and what you believe and have you go, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so often we're talking past each other on polarizing issues that like we're just we're seeing buzzwords and phrases, and we think we know all there is to know about what a person is saying based on those things. And we just sort of often lose our ability to deeply listen to each other. And I think that's important. But I also think it's important that people of color and women and any other marginalized, social group in America or in the world not feel like they have to put up with everything in order to reconcile. Because a lot of times the burden for reconciliation falls on the people who have been pushed to the side and oppressed. And then the majority culture will go, well, if you want to be reconciled, then you need to do this, that, and the other. And that's just unfair. That's just not right. I think that, yes, we make space for people. Yes, people are whole people, including racist people, which is very difficult for me to grasp. But they are still whole people. And they still have a story. And there's reasons behind why they think the way they are and who they are. And so there is a degree of patience that I have with people as they learn. But I'm also just not willing to allow people to have a platform in my life or in my world who are unwilling to listen. I'll leave you in the space because you still serve a purpose, but I'm not going to platform you. I'm not going to endorse or do anything that makes anybody believe, or you believe, that like what you're saying is helpful to the conversation. Because I just don't think that's right. I don't think it's just. I think it dishonors the people that are really trying to move forward in the world.
Man, it's profound.
And as white people, we have this tendency to believe that we should have access and have stages for everything. And we were brought up this way. And being brought up a way does not excuse behavior. I've been learning, and I still am learning very much, to be curious. And a part of being curious is learning and listening. And I also want to encourage listeners that part of listening doesn't mean a person of color you have to go get them and they have to talk to you. There are so many resources. There are so many people of color, Black authors, Latinx authors, Asian. There's unlimited resources. We live in a day and in an age where it is at your fingertips. And let's be honest, if you're a white person, there's a higher chance that you have access and modes of transportation. Even if it's not financial access, you have modes of transportation to get you to a library. It's just, we don't have an excuse. And dear good Jesus, don't say you're too tired to do it. Like, in that it's so much work.
Too busy.
Because I'm tired. I have my mom of a 5 and an 8-year-old, and I work full time, and I have a husband. And well, he's really a co-partner, so I'm not going to say it like that. But one of the reasons that we are gradually making this shift to focus more on anti-racism with permission to be is because I believe that we are one humanity and one community, and we are not living that way. We have never lived that way. And so we need to learn our history, and we need to learn what the details really were, not what we were taught in Western high school. Or not what we were talking about. Now, I'm a little older, but back in the 90s, we were not taught Black history. We were, just like everything else, do the highlights during the month of February, and that's it. Yeah. And that is tokenism, and not even good tokenism, if there's such a thing, which I don't think there is.
Right.
There's not.
I don't think there's good, but it was really extra bad. No.
Yeah. When I think about it being Black History Month, so we've been in conversations too, Becca, about like how ways that we can honor the contributions of Black people, honor Black History Month, and recognizing that every month is Black History Month. It's just not February. And so it is up to us, going to riff off of Brian Stevenson again, it's in that another way that we create change is that we have to change the narratives. And so the narratives that we've been handed are through a lens of white supremacy, of conquest and colonization. And so then we have to go back in and create new narratives, new containers, new contexts, and add to and sort of parse out those things. And that's the beauty of Black History Month, is that you get sort of a concentrated effort to sort of parse out different narratives than what we were handed growing up, that like Martin Luther King was just this peacemaker. Martin Luther King Jr. was a radical. He was
100%.
He went to jail more times than Malcolm X did, but yet we're taught that Malcolm X was violent.
Malcolm X is the person that I was working at a church, and it was MLK Day, and it's a predominantly white evangelical church I was working at. And every MLK Day or weekend since over the last several years, white evangelicals have been very intentional about making sure that they check the MLK box on that weekend in one way, shape, or form. And a lot of times it's tokenism. And I think some people genuinely try to do something that honors Dr. King.
Can we define tokenism real quick?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think tokenism, it's hard to define. I'm really not great at defining things. I usually wind up using metaphors, but yeah, but
Johnny on the spot, right?
but what I'll say with tokenism is it's heartless, hollow nods to culturally important moments and people, and justice efforts. It's almost, I mean, I guess to use the analogy, it's like, sort of putting a token in a jukebox. It's not really being committed to something. It's not committing to learning how to play a song. It's putting a quarter in the jukebox and having the jukebox play the song in really an artificial way because it's not present in the room. And so I think for a lot of people, when they go near these conversations about race specifically, it is, as you mentioned, Becca, my anti-racism work is having Black friends. And then I can relax because that's easy. And anytime I say something or do something racist, I can just go, well, put the token in the jukebox. I have Black friends, and my Black friends can sort of be my, the thing that comes out and says to everyone, oh, I'm not racist. And so around MLK, you do see a lot of tokenization, which is we have one Black staff person at our church. This is the time of year where our whole church hears from them. Either they're preaching or they're singing or they're doing some kind of special tribute to Dr. King. And so a couple of years ago, I was at this church and we did a video. It was Maya Angelou talking about Dr. King, Gandhi, and Malcolm X. And the lead pastor called me. I was at the DMV and my day off. Lead pastor called me and said, hey, I just saw the video. We need to cut Malcolm X because Malcolm X hated white people. And I was like, huh. It's so interesting to me how different Malcolm X is understood from the Black community to white evangelicals who have a whitewashed ideology about Dr. King. Because there are things that Dr. King said and was about that if we said those things on Sunday mornings at church, people would go lose their minds and say, I'm leaving this church because they've abandoned the gospel. And so I think that there is this idea about Dr. King that, like you said, that he was this, really nice, friendly guy who never said anything that ruffled any feathers. It's the same thing that evangelicals have ironically done with Jesus, is that here's a human being who is executed by the state for things that he has said and done and things that were said and done about him. But it's everything about Jesus is sort of sterilized into spiritual talk and metaphor and abstract ideas about how to be a better person. And we completely, in evangelical circles, remove the Jesus versus empire. We remove the Dr. King versus empire. And it's just an individual who's encouraging us to be good people as if they're both motivational speakers, but they're actually legitimately trying to tear down empire in not just in our minds, but in the world. Yeah. Because when people start to believe that empire and hierarchy is evil and is a social disease, they will act to remove it and to get rid of it, no matter where it comes from. So now with the reason, we have such a swelling evangelical support for the despot we have in office in America is because people don't believe any longer that Jesus was versus anything. It's like Jesus is for everyone and Jesus is for Donald Trump, regardless of how evil, how much he lies, how much of an example of just an immoral human being he may be. Christians are like, well, Jesus loves him. and that's just like, that's a poor understanding of revolutionaries like Dr. King, Jesus, Gandhi, Mandela, you name it.
it's like a old black woman say, I love Jesus, but I cuss a little. It's a both and, okay? But so I'm reading James Cone right now, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And I mean, it's
James
just
Cone mess you up, man.
phenomenal.
He's so good. Yeah.
Yes. Phenomenal writing. And there's this, I think, he explores this topic, and hopefully I don't butcher it, but where white evangelicals start off as the cross being this glory point, this thing that's going to take me to glory. The experience of black people, I think he used the scripture at Acts, is that Jesus died upon a tree. And so in tying that to lynching.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And so in that, the experiences, the history that we are often told to forget and to get over is one of the strongest connection points to this spiritual liberatory figure, Jesus the Christ, that we have.
Yeah.
But yet evangelicals, white evangelicals, they create this erased history of that suffering.
Yes.
And what that suffering was for and represented. And so I think, you know, if you haven't read James Cone, and I think James Cone is an excellent example in a black man being able to transform in public view, because you see a transformation through his views.
Yeah.
David and I were talking about this from the 60s, 1969, I think his first book came out, to when he wrote The Cross and the Lynching Tree in the 90s, to this more inclusive and liberatory theology for all. And so when we talk about obstacles in this country that we're facing and becoming a more just, I love that you're Corey, that you set yourself up to be this conversationalist around justice, faith, and culture. And that's so modeled after Jesus, that this Christ-like figure, this figure who suffered and died. But that just makes me question then, if that is the case, if that is the experience, if because in suffering we're having to talk about racism and white supremacy and how oppressive it is, how does that affect you on a personal level in your daily life, how you exist in the world?
Yeah, man. I think, and I hope this answers your question, but you said something that I really wanted to speak to, is that oftentimes when Black people are outspoken about justice, certainly ones who come from, hail from sort of the Christian tradition, the assumption is that you have become pro-Black because you have, read James Baldwin or the writings of Dr. King or Malcolm X, or watching Malcolm X videos, that you're just this sort of Black empowered from the Nation of Islam. That's kind of what people think. Well, for me, my motivation and what started all of this for me was theological. I started talking about race more the more I began to understand that the Bible from cover to cover are, I should say, books about justice. Like, and people over the years have been like, oh, the Bible's about so many other things. I'm like, no. When you reduce it down to its bare essentials, these books were written about human beings trying to understand how they should live with one another. And when you see sort of the prophets speaking and the wrath of God showing up, it's kind of around this idea of, if you walk into a house and there are 10 people in the house, and 9 of them are starving and 1 of them is fat, that's what the Bible is speaking to, is that that's not okay. We have to do something about that. How do we repair this broken thing? And so for me, when you talk about like me talking and speaking up and living for this, it's more about my commitment to understanding my relationship to God, and therefore how should I relate to people, than it is me trying to be pro-Black. I am pro-Black because it's empowering to be pro-Black, but that does not mean that I'm anti anything else. And that's sort of this false dichotomy that's created. It's like by me being pro-Black or saying Black Lives Matter, that, and Becca, you hit on it earlier. I think for a lot of white people, because they're so accustomed to learning themselves as the protagonist and the center of attention, and everything sort of built around them, from flesh-colored Band-Aids to the history that we learn in school to, all of the things that sort of inform us that whiteness is the center of America. Anytime you decenter that, it's offensive. So me saying Black Lives Matter is not saying I hate white people, but white people feel decentered by me saying that. White people feel decentered by me saying pro-Black, and that's not a me issue.
No.
And I think learning to not be codependent in my own life has helped me in a lot of ways when it comes to dealing with social issues. It's like, I'm not going to be, white people and Black people are trauma bonded by slavery. And we can't we can't keep acting like slavery didn't happen here. It did.
No. Yeah, definitely.
When we look at other examples of slavery, like, just from the Exodus story, the Jews left Egypt. They didn't stay there. You know what I'm saying? And many of the Jews stayed in Babylon, post the exile. A lot of them stayed after they could go back to their homeland, but a lot of them stayed. But we don't have a lot of writing, or any writing I've seen, about how the Babylonians and Jews lived and acted together. I have no idea what that was like, but I know in America, for Black people and white people, having to live with each other with not just slavery, but just 50 to 55 years ago, civil rights movement. That's not like, this is not like
nothing.
You were talking about ancient history. This is like right behind us. There are people living and walking today and breathing today who were arrested, shot at, attacked by dogs for marching with Dr. King. And they're alive today to tell these stories to us. One of the just recently in Los Angeles, one of the girls from the bombing in Alabama, there were 4 that were killed and 1 survived. There was a 5th that was at that church when it was bombed. She's in her 60s. She's in her. She's not like she's 100 years old or 80 or 90. She's in her 60s. So this stuff is like right here with us. And so our emotional issues as Black and white people, we have been in an abusive relationship. And we who are Black who have been abused have to learn to not be codependent and not rescue white people from their pain, from their work, from the messiness of having to deal with racism and how they do it. I've talked to white allies and I've said, hey, listen, I'm glad you're doing this, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be messy. You're going to make some missteps. There's going to be one group of Black people who love what you're doing, and there's going to be a group of Black people who hate what you're doing, but you keep doing it anyway because it's important work. And I don't know what the right answer is for you, and I can't rescue you from that, nor should I, because it's not my job.
Yeah, in our spiritual community, we often have conversations when there's all these calls for peace and unity. It's like there's some things you don't have to straddle the fence on, And so there was a quote from your blog. You said, I don't know if it was from you or your words or that you were quoting somebody, said, the sinister result of growing comfortable with injustice is that we start to call evil good and good evil. And so I was just struck. I was so struck by that. It indicates the urgency and the necessity to speak truth to power. And so much of Black History Month, if you want inspiration, is truth tellers speaking to power when it seemed like they had none. But one of the things that I'm learning that Black women are teaching me, that my association with Black people who are oppressed, is that all power really is just ability. And so if you have voice, if you have an ability, you can use that in a fight for justice. You can join this fight. You don't have to stand on the sidelines.
I had a friend of mine that we used to talk about this stuff all the time. And I would always say to him that Rome always wins. And what I meant when I said that was that in each generation of people who resist empire, the empire ultimately takes them out. Dr. King was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. Jesus was crucified.
Yeah.
There were tons of martyrs, even after the resurrection, accounts. There's all this writing of more suffering, of disciples being beheaded and crucified, all those things that people who are outspoken in their generation usually don't win. But ultimately, in the grander story, they are winning. The martyrs, the oppressed, the people who are using their power and their voice to speak up, they are moving the ball forward for the next generation. And every time Rome and empire thinks that it has crushed the resistance, there's a whole nother generation of people inspired by the people that they crushed to keep moving forward. And that's one of the most important things to me about Black History Month is that, I know that there's complicated history of Black History Month. Some folks are like, 1 month, why should we continue to do this and celebrate that they give us 1 month? And other people are like, well, it's important that we at least have that. And maybe some people fall in between. But I will say that the importance of a month like this is that we get to hear the stories of people who spoke up and who moved the ball forward for all of us. And we can pick up on what they said and did and go, oh, yes, here's how I can retell their story in my time, because my experience is the same. That's what's really crazy to me when you read like a James Baldwin and you read the things that he's saying and you go, yo, this was 45 years ago. And I just said this yesterday. I just had this experience last week, so I think that's the importance is that it's not just that like we remember them, but it's also that we feel a sense of connection to go, their story is my story. You go, well, me too. I'm not alone in this. This is why the Bible is so powerful at times where you have the things that the writers of scripture are writing that you're like, oh man, I didn't know that anybody else had ever experienced that or ever felt that. That's exactly what I feel. That's exactly what I'm going through. So it's not even that, like, for me at this point in my life, it's not even this, like, I read scripture to go, well, God's going to fix it. I read scripture more now to go, how did this human being who wrote this down feel about what they were going through? And how did they respond to it? And how did they pray? And where did they see God in it? And where did they see human beings? And where's the justice and the injustice and the equity and the inequity and the equality? Where's all of that in the story? More so than I'm reading it because I'm checking a box or because I think that there's some magic that God's going to show up and pay all my bills or deal with all my depression and anxiety. It's just I don't look for that. What I look for is the humanity. And when I'm reading and like how human beings lived through the stuff that I'm living through.
Yes. The Bible is narrative, man. That's so good. That's so good.
Yeah.
It's showing us, your words just showed us how it's so important to look at the ancestors and to look at this piece of history. But when we're not looking, just like you said, we're not looking for this overarching. We're looking at the individual and how they responded. And I love that you said the emotions and the feelings. And that is so important because if being an embodied human being, every part counts. It's not just following, how did they follow the commandments or what laws did they break, but it's literally how their actions and how whatever group of peoples were around them at that time.
Well, it gives you permission to be like, no pun intended, but you get permission to be, right? When you can see that someone else, and I don't know where this comes from for us as humans, but when you see that someone else has thought, believed, felt, been through what you've been through, there's something about that makes you go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm not the only, I'm not the only one. And that is what Black History Month sort of connects us to, certainly as Black folks, but also as white folks, is that like there are people who have existed and people who are still existing and being that are moving the world forward, and they're connected to all of us. And I think that the more white folks are in tune with their own ancestry,
Mm-hmm.
I think the more anti-racist they become.
Mm.
Because if I'm in tune with the true history of my ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
what they did,
Mm-hmm.
how they acted, the world that they created,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know very many people who wouldn't then be like, oh man, that was really messed up.
Yep.
And I have to do something now to like help make this right. Because if your mom went out and murdered some parents and left some children orphaned, you as a conscientious person who finds out about that goes, I got to help those kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I didn't do that. My mom did that, but that's not my connection to my mom gives me a connection to those kids in this trauma bond. And I got to do something about this. I got to make sure they get to school. I got to make sure that they eat. I got to make sure that they're clothed, that they have home. And even if it's at a disadvantage or puts me out some, I still got to do it because something awful happened to them based on someone who I'm connected to. And so I think the more white folks even get into the true history of America, the genocide, the slavery, the brutality towards people of color, and women and people from the LGBTQ community, like all of the brutality that Americans have done to these people, the more we can begin to understand, like, I'm connected to that. I think it's a lot easier to get involved in anti-racism work and justice work in the world.
Thank you for joining us on Permission to Be. I'm your host, Becka Epley, and thank you to my good friend and co-host, Tommy Allgood. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and you'll never miss an episode. If you would leave us a rating and or review, we are always looking for more and more ways to hear from our listeners. You can find the links for today's guest in the show notes located at beckaepley.com.
And dear white people, public service announcement. I don't care if your family, your ancestors treated enslaved people good. That gives me no comfort. So please stop saying it.
we were, my family was benevolent to the people that we owned and treated as cattle. That's just crazy.
You won't believe how many times I have heard that from well-meaning white friends. Just stop.